Okay, broadcasting. Cool. Okay. Sorry about the interruption, guys.
Can you get a copy of the link there?
The link is right here. This should work. Okay. So now we can test, if we wanted, separately test just this method, which is really helpful because then I don't have to write a complicated test that requests that like specific action in the controller. I can literally specifically test this like method in my model. Does that make sense? A, easier to read. B, it's like easier to test. Another thing that's like super helpful is that it makes the code reusable. So perhaps I want to like use for school in some other action. So I'm not repeating the same logic in every action in my controller. So if I wanted to have for show, maybe if I wanted to be like, oh, show lesson for school, for some reason, I could reuse it. As we look at this, can you guys see an example of something that is like too much logic in here? So we can read for like, hey, I smell for this code could be better. Yeah.
Right. It seems like the show is kind of complicated.
Right? What is all this? It's so long. I could probably pull this out into a method, and you guys are more than welcome to do a pull request doing that, because that's like direct practice in fat model skinny controller. So if we could like have something like, oh, if the lesson is soon, which is what this seems to be doing, then if I were to read it, I wouldn't have to try to understand what time.now greater than lesson.start time even meant. I could just be like, oh, if the lesson is soon, do that. So I'm going to actually summarize like how to determine what is like logic that should be in the controller versus what is not. Because you could argue like, hey, like, what about this respond to do format? What about this if statement? Like, how do I know that should be there versus not? So logic that we would want in there is stuff related to the request response. So that could be flash notifications. That could be choosing whether to redirect, I think I still spelled it wrong, or respond, or like render a view or something. Everything was in the model, or helpers or other things that I'll tell you guys more about. So here, like, this is responding to the request. It's very relevant, you know? But this isn't that relevant, so this is something we could move out. This could be moved out into a method as well. Any questions? Okay. And then quickly, the benefits. Quick and simple. Okay, so the second topic is I want to talk a little bit about scopes. It's something that like a lot of people don't think to use. In fact, we haven't used a lot of scopes in RailsSchool. Scopes basically allow you to chain different methods. So let's look up scopes quickly.
I think the people on the Etherpad asked if you could increase the font.
Oh, okay. Hopefully that's better. So here's an example of someone who made like a scope for a t-shirt. So they're like, okay, if a t-shirt is red, there's a scope.red where color is red, right? And then you could have like, here's a scope for maybe like article published. The cool thing about scopes is that they allow you to do 3 things. I could have written a method like that was like def red, and then done shirts where like the color is red. But the reason why you would do a scope instead of another method in the model is you can do things like my model dot scope 1 dot scope 2. So maybe you want like t-shirts dot red dot large. So you can get large shirts that are red in color, and you can chain them that way. Another reason is you can have different methods that you would have like on a column in the database. So for example, my model dot scope dot first, or my model dot scope dot all. So that way you can get like, I think we had in RailsSchool, this is a place we could fix it. This is all future lessons. But we could do a scope that says, hey, like it's a future lesson if the time of the lesson is greater than now. And then we could do future lesson dot all or future lesson dot first and have a lot more functionality. Go ahead.
You can actually do that. If you go back to the documentation in the guide, if you have that open, and scroll up a little bit, right below where they do scope, keep going down. Right above there, that block, if you read the one right above that.
This block?
Yeah, that's equivalent.
Oh, if doing self dot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which we are doing.
Okay, but if we don't put self dot, that's when we can't.
Well, then it would be on the instance. Yes, it would work.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. So self dot method equals scope. Is that clear? Sorry for confusing you guys.
And it's totally amazing how it works. It's totally magical.
I haven't actually read this, but is it the case that scope is simply creating a class method on that method model? Is that all it's doing? Is it saying this method is actually just a class method?
That's what the documentation said. It's just syntactic sugar.
Okay.
But there's a lot of magic inside of Active Record that makes the chaining work.
Oh, okay.
The other thing is like you might want to do a self dot function if it's like kind of complicated what you're doing, but you might want to do a scope if it's just one line and it's really easy to like read it. So maybe like self dot method when your logic is complicated. And then, okay, so the other useful trick is if you feel like you're writing some code that you could use for another application, for example, like even something like an HTTP request, you might want to, like, that's the sniff test for checking if there's a gem for it. So if you feel like you're writing some code that isn't so specific to your application that you could reuse, then either you could use a gem that's out there or you could write your own gem, which Adrian has conveniently done a blog post on. So like I can show you guys a link to that. So package into gems or plugins code you would use across applications. So example, and I'm going to show you the link to the Koshek's blog. Oh, okay. I'll put the link. A good place to check for like cool Ruby tools is obviously like check GitHub. And another way is probably to check if it's on Ruby Toolbox, because that lists all of the most like popular plugins and gems. We're not as used to searching for plugins, but we are used to searching for gems, which are like, there's a lot of stuff on Ruby Toolbox that I didn't know about, which is why I put the link there. It covers lots of things and has them organized in a cool way.
Is it Ruby Toolbox or is it Ruby Gems, which actually gives you usage and handling? Or they both do that?
Let's see.
You can search by category, right? Like you can say like, show me all gems that do something with emails. That's a really well. That's good one. They're not.
Ruby Gems, you kind of have to search it. But maybe there's something here. They seem to be alphabetical here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I more recently discovered that the tagging feature in the Visual Watch is pretty cool. I can be like, oh, show me anything that has something to do with like dates or something to do with like address.
Email processing, email sending. There's so many good like categories for you to like search within. Yeah. So that's another topic. And then one major concept that people forget, especially beginners, four, is models don't have to have inheritance and don't have to be correlated to a data like active record. So one example is like, okay, so all of these models are taking inheritance from active record like : base, which means that attendance is like in my database as like a model, right? So there's lessons in my database, there's polls in my database, all these things. But very infrequently do people create models that don't necessarily, like ability is not something in our like database. Ability like A and ability B, like there's no table for abilities. But what the ability model does in our application is it's basically a can file. So can is a gem that helps me like determine who can see what in a given application. So we have students in RailsSchool and we have teachers in RailsSchool. So we want to be able to be like, okay, well, you know, all users can read blah, blah. If the user is an admin or a teacher, they can manage the lessons. Oh, I see this. If they're a teacher, they can manage the lessons. If they're an admin, they can do everything. So this basically determines what someone can do in the application. But you'll notice it's doing logic and it's like initializing itself and is like useful to the application without necessarily being correlated with something in our database. Does that make sense? And so it's not there's no like less than sign. It's not inheriting any like, you know, active record : base or like anything like that. It is, Gabe, what did you call this when you do include?
It's a mix-in. Okay,
so it's a mix-in. This is an example of a mix-in. And the reason why it's a mix-in is because it's taking code from hidden, tucked away somewhere in our gem, and it's building upon that. So can ability is like something in our gem that has all these like methods associated with it. So this is an example of a mix-in. You can write much more complicated mix-ins. So I have some other applications that I can show you that like have models that are not at all associated with databases that are super complicated and do a lot of logic. And that's a great place to put that logic, especially if it's not associated with views, which is what helpers are for, which I'll explain to you. Is that clear? Any questions?
What would the advantage be of putting it in this one model rather than putting, for example, the ability class in the user model?
So if I put it, so if you look at the user model, everything in it is like basically all the whole code base of everything in here is dumped into this class user. So it's much easier to read if the ability class is separate, right? If I had, yeah, that's why we separate out our JavaScript. That's why we separate out our CSS. It's just really helpful. Also for user, where it is an inherited. Oh, I see. No, you don't have to inherit all of it. So, but the whole point is to like just make it really readable that hey, this.
So what determines when you want to have something be a model versus not a model? Why is this model just like a serious object or another just like file? What determines when something should be a model?
So the other types of files that I might add are helpers, which I'll talk about, like what determines whether it should be a helper versus a model. You could have, like we have this thing called workers, which I'll also talk about, but every single one of those has a special purpose, but a model could just be like a class that does some logic, and it could really be anything. So the model is probably least specific, I would say, place to put things. Go ahead, Samir.
I guess one way I would think about what different models is anything that represents like data or manipulating data should go into the model. My most recent example where I actually made that decision was I have postal addresses for some application. I'm not actually storing the postal address. I'm only storing a string from the database, which is a full string. But I want to do things with the postal address, like I want to validate the address, let's say. So I want to say that the zip needs to be 5 numbers, one after the other. So I want to do things that are very model-like on my postal address data. But for various reasons, I didn't want to actually store that as a separate attribute. So I didn't want a zip code attribute and a street address attribute in my actual database. But I still wanted that logic in my application. So the way I separated that out was I basically stored just a blank, like a plain string with a whole address, but then I had a postal address model. I could have, you can't put it anywhere you want, you can put it in helpers, but then for other people that are reading my code, seeing it in models reminds them.
It just makes sense.
Yeah, it's readability. It's like my coders can be like, oh, okay, this is going to do things that models seem to do. There's going to be validation involved. There's going to be other things like that. So that was my logic for putting it in models.
And I'll talk about helpers in other places, so you know why not to put things there. So we kind of briefly talked about mix-in. So like ability.rb is a mix-in because it's including stuff from another place and like building upon that. I also want to talk about concerns, which are a little bit complicated of a topic. You'll notice that when you make a Rails app, you automatically have this folder called concerns, and usually it has nothing in it. So here we've actually made a concern called badge and made a module in it. So our badge module is like got all this code that we want every badge to have. So actually Gabe just explained concerns to me, so he can totally chime in if he wants. But active support.concern, by extending that, what we're basically doing is allowing ourselves to like have, like we have logic that's like, oh, badge dot like all, badge dot find by badge ID. So all of that logic is on the badge module. So for example, like say we want to find the badge of ID 3. I don't know. So we can do that by calling this method on badge. But it also allows us to have methods on like a specific badge. So an example of that is like, we have 3 types of badges in RailsSchool that you can earn. We have the Code Warrior badge, the 49er badge, and the Teacher badge. And this whole module allows us to run methods on each of these and put them all in the badge folder, so I have those methods available for all of them. So I don't have to rewrite like in every single badge file all the things I should be able to do for it. So an example is like, maybe I want like badge.id, but I can't do like the badge class for, here, I'm gonna open up console and that'll make things easier. Uh-oh. I have to do a bundle install, guys. I'm using RS. Okay, I'll let this run for now, but I'll show you examples within like my thing. So let's see where we have. So here we're calling a find by badge ID on the badge module. But we might also in the future be like, hey, badge.first.id. So this allows us to make this like badge class be able to have methods on itself as a whole, as well as methods on instances of it. Does that make sense? That's the whole point of concerns. It's super esoteric, like it feels, but I guess there are probably many cases you might want to use it if you have like some whole, like our website has a concept of badges. So if you're adding into your website like a complicated concept of anything, it's helpful to like be able to run methods on it versus also on instances of it. Does that make sense? This is too complicated. Yeah.
Is that because you're trying to avoid backing into the database table? So you don't have a badges table, but you want a class that behaves as if there's a table?
Basically, yes. Basically, if you click on Code Warrior, please, Bianca. Samir, if you look at the allocate to user method, you can imagine if the content of that method is stored in a database, that's a little bit wacky. You're basically storing logic in the database, and it's not that's a real bad practice if you're storing logic in your database. So I did this so that we can store the logic in code that's in Git. So yes, just a short answer to your question. And to this concern business, basically it's just a mix-in. It's just like a nicely packaged mix-in.
So this is the mix-in.
Yeah. And Rails really encourages you to use these things.
And you can look up, like, I was just reading this where I was looking up active support concerns. And it shows you how to use it if you were creating logic like this. So, you know, it tells you how to like, hey, put this in self.included, put this in module, stuff like that. So, and I'm also going to re-explain what Gabe said because it might not necessarily have been super clear. Is everyone clear on that, or are you guys want me to explain it quickly? Does that make sense? Yeah.
What is the function of typically a module in Rails? It seems similar to a class, but is it concerned?
I'll let Gabe answer that.
So a module is very much like a class, and you can't instantiate it. It's just a bucket of methods. And oftentimes you want, for example, your active record models, you might want to share some methods among them. And that a module, or even more specifically a concern, which is a kind of module, is a really convenient way to share some methods across classes. Like if you look at gems like Kaminari that let you paginate the models, for example, it's basically you install this gem called Kaminari, and all of a sudden you can paginate any model in that, right? Under the hood, they're using these concerns to share that functionality with all your different models.
So modules allow you to share methods, whereas classes allow you to share like instances of methods.
It's a little more complicated because you can inherit from classes, but modules, you can sort of think of them as stripped down classes. Because they behave very similarly in a lot of ways, except you can't create instances of them.
So pretty much just really good for making like, it's like a simple class, but only to share like methods across your application. All the extra logic that classes provide.
Right.
And like, there's a very clear example right here for why we have a badge module, because we want all these methods, all find by badge ID, find by slug, and like ID and slug to be available for all three of these classes that we've created. So we're not rewriting all those methods in every single one of these classes.
You can think of the badge concern as like the dirty details, and then when you're looking at the badges, it's very beautiful. So like, I can make the badge concern a gem, you just gem install it, you don't even think about it, follow the instructions, and it works. It's a way of talking stuff away.
And do you think Ruby has modules as an optimization? Because you could just get the same behavior by having a parent class, right?
That you never instantiate.
That you never instantiate in your code, though you could if you wanted to. Is it an optimization, or is it like a secure security. I wonder why, like, they choose, like, why they choose to have a concept of model.
That's a great question.
So one reason could be that you can only inherit from one class, whereas you can mix in many modules.
Right.
Oh, and you can't mix in classes.
And there's another thing, and so when you also have a class, the way it does dependencies, so like dependency tree is different. So the way it, so for example, if you have a constant in a module, you can't use that constant in the class that mixes it in. And if you have a constant in the class and you inherit from it, you can use a constant that's. So there's like all these little fine things, but a lot of, I think, the difference between modules and classes are not necessarily implementation details, but it's design details. Like, you know, how do you want to share it? Like, is it an object, is it an instance, or is it something that shares methods? But yeah.
So thanks. So I was a little bit incorrect. I was like oversimplifying it. It's like a helpful way. I found it helpful to think about it that way when I was learning about these things. But the reality is that modules let you do certain things that you couldn't accomplish in classes.
Well, thanks, man.
No, actually, in C++, I think, so there's, now I remember, like, I first learned about modules when I asked the question in Ruby, how do I do inheritance from multiple parents, which is something I think you can do in C++ or Java. Like, you can actually say in C++ less than, and then list all the classes you want to inherit from, which you can't do in Ruby, I think. And I think in asking that question, I learned the answer. In Ruby, you don't do multiple inheritance. You mix in many modules.
So
That's kind of it's sort of the Ruby way of doing multiple inheritance. Basically.
So the concept of multiple inheritance, if it's not clear, is like here, I can't do lesson belongs to active record base and can or whatever. I can't like list multiple things that this lesson inherits, right? But I can list in this badge like multiple mix-ins for it to incorporate. Like I can be like include this and extend that and stuff like that. Which is like complicated stuff that you should get to when you're like putting all your major logic elsewhere and not in your controller. So we covered mix-ins. I'll write up a little bit on that later. Next thing is helpers. So helpers are in this little folder under helpers in app. And here we write code that we don't want to write in our views. So a lot of times, like, we'll have a view and I don't know, like the most complicated view we probably have is our, I don't know, lesson index maybe. But basically here we're like trying to do as limited logic as possible so that when someone reads the view, we can notice what's going on very clearly. So let's look at some of the stuff we might have like in our application helper. So this application helper makes something available everywhere in our application. So we've written things like, hey, if lesson today day will give you the lesson for today. Or I don't know, format date will format the date into this pretty thing, right? So this is something we'll probably use like many times in our code. Like if I were to search for it, look at all the places that in my views that I'm using format date. I have it in announce. I have it in future lessons. I have it in statistics, right? So instead of like rewriting all of that logic that's in here, we're just using our little function that makes it very clear when I read it what it means, and all the logic is done in one place. So helpers specifically are for logic that you might want to put in your views. Does that make sense? So logic. And then the next thing I'm going to cover is decorators. Some people argue that decorators should never be used. Decorators are similar to helpers in that they're supposed to be logic that belongs in your views, but it's organized differently. So you'll notice that for these helpers, I can like create any helper name I want and utilize it. So this is like my FAQ helper, which basically seems to format my questions in my FAQ page. So if I look for where I'm using that, I'm using that in my FAQ page over and over and over, and I've labeled it FAQ helper, so it's clear that this relates to my FAQ view. But the way that you don't see a decorator folder here, because you only add the decorator folder if you have the gem for it. So we create and use the decorator folder with this gem called Draper, and we can read about it. This is it. Sorry, I'm just making it bigger. Oops. So Draper allows you to make these decorators that inherit from the Draper decorator module, and have things like, oh, what's the published status or published at? And it'll give you like a formatted published at time, for example. But the reason why decorators in this decorator folder are different is because they're organized more by the model that they might be associated with. So in this case, we're looking at the article model, and any like different little helpers you might want to use for articles that might be across like 3 different views or like 6 different pages we can use. Whereas like view helpers here usually specifically relate to the view. But one could argue that helpers can do everything that decorators can. And it's a little bit debatable. Like they have, if you read about their documentation, it actually like makes an argument that you should use a decorator instead, and like how to convert helpers into decorators. They're very similar. So if you see that in a like complicated app that you happen to download, you should know that decorators aren't something new or fancy. It's something like a helper, just organized differently. And I'll let the experts chime in if they have any other thoughts on decorators. Yeah. Don't get worried when you see decorators. So yeah, they totally have like an argument. Like they're like, oh, well, you want to like specify something for a book instead of these nebulous namespaced helpers spread across controllers and views. So it's like very opinionated documentation.
Well, I guess, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That is the opinion, right? So the thing is that when you're writing code inside your views and you want to do things, like you want to say, show currency as European. Right now, if you're doing a helper, basically it gets added to action view, like the model action view, helpers, I think. So then show currency as European becomes something that's available throughout your code, through all your views. And you want to separate it out so that you know that everything that's helping you view currencies is going to be in currency document.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to read, right? Yeah.
So I've never used it. I tend to like dump all my helper functions and the helper files and just like dump it in there. But actually, I mean, the thing is, you can choose to organize your helpers folder, so you can have like currency helper, products helper, and like be very careful of where you put your code. But I guess
that's probably the argument helper people would make.
Yeah. I've never used it, so I wouldn't know when it actually, like when does your code become big enough to actually?
Yeah, I can show you. So we have this. We're running a competition at Kashex for ideas, and like we'll code them, and we're using decorators there. So there's all these decorators. We have application decorator, board decorator, like idea decorator. So all the ideas have many different types of like ways, you know, like unvote button. Even like buttons are in here. It's pretty cool. So maybe like it's using, this seems to be using other helpers with it. Do you see? So it's like, okay, if we want to like show this in the view, and I can show you how it's used in the view. Oh, I guess we're not using this in the view. But like, you know, we have really complicated views here, and maybe we want to like show. And there's a lot of like, I'm not sure exactly what is being used, but there's a lot of like different like helpers here that we're using. So let me show you an example. That actually is, okay, maybe title and author.
I saw that on the view.
Cool. So here we just have a link to idea, title, and author. And it really like, you have it after the equal. Go ahead. Oh, you found out why we might want to.
I'm just going to ask you a question. I've never used the library using. How do you associate a delegator with a model?
A decorator?
No, sorry, decorator, yeah.
I think that's the magic. Now I get it. I think, right?
It's like automatically associated with a model.
So
Like,
it just uses those different things with the same name.
Well, in the documentation on GitHub, it said .delegate. Are we doing that here? In the controller?
we,
Or
I
does it
see.
say delegate now too? Because we see that delegate at the top is, I meant .decorate. Yeah, so we do have.
Yeah.
Okay, so you call
And then there is magic that finds that figures out.
so then it's like what's that class have?
Okay, so as opposed to, so helper methods basically, if you do helper methods, you can't say model dot and then the thing you want to do the decoration. Right? Like you have to.
Oh, you have to
it's
create
not-
the def like method and then call that model in it and then
it's
do
not
stuff to it.
object-oriented, right? So the difference is in my code, do I say, European currency, and then it has the currency value to it,
Mhm.
or do I do currency value dot European style? And the more Ruby way of doing it would be the latter, right? You want to be able to say, here's the data I have,
Mhm.
and here's how I want you to show it.
Right.
Not the other way around. The other way around would be like a PHP way of doing it, right? Like you have to know what the function is. So I guess that way just give you a way to like keep the object-oriented paradigm in your code.
Yeah. So like so we're using title.author, and when we have the link to it, we do idea.title and author. Whereas if we were using a helper, which is like, I don't know, say ideas helper, let's look for this, or submit idea button.
Will those don't take arguments? Embedded URL fields.
Oh, okay, right, because this doesn't take like, just the, let me keep these open. Ideas helper and idea decorator. So title and author depends on the idea like that we're talking about. So every idea has a different author and title, right? So if we use a decorator, we don't need to do something like take an idea and then idea.title, you know, stuff like that. We can call it on our specific idea. Whereas for a helper, here's an example where we're actually passing arguments. And when we have it in the view, oh, we do use it. I guess both work.
Well, it just so happens that we are cool with, what, maybe they wrote it first and then they wrote it again.
They wrote it again, guys.
Do you have an opinion on this, like, do you have an opinion on like link to versus writing out the HTML? Or you see here these h.content tags create a span with the class, or a div with the class.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of this stuff?
I find it harder to like understand the code from like reading this perspective, but it's easier to understand the view. So like it's definitely like harder for me to understand what's going on here immediately, but that probably matters less from a layman coming to the code and looking at the views first and trying to understand what's going on and then digging deeper. Like as you notice, like all of these strategies are ways for someone else who's coming to your code to understand how to like go and delve and delve and find where they're looking to fix something.
I guess like a counter argument is if you're like viewing the source for your page or using the inspector and wondering where this div with the class has div comes from. I think this is not a best practice or not. It's just sort of
Benefits
to
and
me.
yeah.
So that's why I wanted to ask. Does anybody have opinions on using the content type stuff to generate your HTML versus using ERB or Camel or Slim?
So did we decide that like decorators allow you to use like methods versus having to call the parameters, and that's kind of like a cheaper factor?
Yes.
Okay. And why is it that you can do that with decorators and not with helpers? That wasn't entirely clear to me.
Oh, because you'll notice in our controllers, we actually link, so here's an idea controller. We actually like here category, we chose to like call a .decorate to it. Actually,
that makes all the methods available just by calling .decorate on that?
I don't know if it's this line.
It wraps it in another method, another object.
Oh, I see.
And that object has those methods defined. Whereas with the helpers, it goes back to the module question, because the helpers are just dumb modules that, as Samir said, they just get mixed into your view context, so they're available everywhere. And they have to take parameters because they're dumb. They're just the view context.
I guess
I have to call the .decorate off, otherwise those methods are not available to that instance of logic.
With the decorator, yeah.
I guess to answer your question, with regards to like link to, I tend to avoid link to. I like putting all my HTML stuff directly inside my view, even for my own sanity, right? Like I like to know, like, here's all the classes that I wanted the browser to show, and that's all in my view. Like I can just look at my view and I know right away, this stuff is going to go to the browser. Whereas if I say link to, and actually, I don't know if Ondine first brought this up like once. I was like teaching Rails, and I was making a big deal about how like, oh, Rails makes you like your one app program is so easy. You know, life is so great now. You can just say link to, and I don't know if you said this to me. You were like, when this person was like, well, why is that easy? I said, isn't that easy? Like, if you just type in link to, and they're like, well, I spent 15 years learning to type in ahref. And now I have to learn to type in link to. Why are you telling me it's easier? And it didn't occur to me until then. Like, actually, yeah, you're right. It's not easier in any like. I mean, if you learn ahref, you learn ahref, but you don't need to like learn this whole damn new language. So, like, there are aspects of like the Views code, helper code, which I just like screw it. I just type in ahref in my HTML, you know, because in my ERB because like that way I'm like, okay, I know that the browser's going to see the A tag for sure. Right? So that's sort of my opinion. Like how when I put
And like maybe a good middle ground is if you're doing like all of this logic over and over in your views, like that's a good time to pull it out into a helper, so you're not repeating that same logic like 10 times. You know, like it's one like basic tenet is you don't want to be repeating your code. So if you can avoid repeating it, do that. Okay, so we talked about decorators. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about was generally like good syntax. So there's this like style guide that covers some of the topics we already talked about, but it like covers Ruby on Rails best practices in terms of syntax. And there's versions of these for just Ruby and just Rails. So if you're looking for like, hey, how should I write different methods in Ruby, like specifically how many spaces there should be and stuff like that, this covers that. So it'll be like 4 spaces is bad, 2 spaces is good, very like specific stuff. Whereas this will cover some of the stuff that we just discussed, which is like models. So, like do non-active record models freely, which is what we were talking about, where models don't necessarily need to be associated with like tables in your database. Or it'll talk about like, this is a long section, but like migrations and how now the convention is to do like def change instead of def up and def down, which is the old way of doing it. So I'm gonna link these first and then we can go through some of the concepts in them. And then the other thing that I also wanted to talk about was object-oriented programming, and I'm going to touch on that right now because we already kind of discussed it. Object-oriented programming is a somewhat scary, like when people first hear about it, it's like, oh, what does that even mean? Like, am I doing that in Ruby? And the good thing about Ruby on Rails is it's like structured in such a way that it's really easy to be doing object-oriented programming. So like just having like, well, the best example probably of object-oriented programming is the badges module. Where did it go? Badges concern. So basically, like here we have this like thing called badge, and we have different functions on it that do different things, and it's different to like me creating these separate functions and like passing badge, right? Or like me redoing the logic over and over, something like that. So object-oriented programming is not that like scary of a subject. It's stuff like this. If you write something like this, you're using object-oriented programming. Does that make sense? So some languages kind of lend themselves to writing big files like this a little bit easier. Like I think Python is like, if you write a file in Python that like does a bunch of stuff or a script, like you kind of like, that's just, it's very easy to just be like, okay, I need a method that does this on this class because that's usually how it's structured. But the same is true if you write Ruby files. So a lot of times people only get exposed to Ruby through Rails and think that object-oriented programming with Ruby is like different or something. So just touching on it. So let's go through some of this. And I think it'd be really great to like share opinions on this, or if you have any questions as we go through this, like, hey, I was always wondering what that folder was about. Like, you should totally ask because it's a good time to like learn all these things about Rails and how it works. So in this style guide, so first it talks about configuration. So one of the things it says is in like, we have this config folder in our Rails app. And you'll notice that there's like a bunch of stuff here. And there's this folder called initializers. Anybody know what goes in initializers? Yep. Perfect. And a lot of times, these files are actually like created when you install a gem. So if you put a gem in your gem file, hit bundle install, and notice that some new files are created, look out for like these initializers being created on the fly that kind of kickstart these gems up. So for example, we got the sidekick gem, which is a lesson we talked about, and all the initializer does is like, hey, like I want to require sidekick stuff in this application. Now what the style guide here is saying is like, hey, keep the initialization code for each gem in a separate file. Don't like have one big file that initializes all your gems. So here we have like, I don't know, I think there's a timeout, no, not a timeout gem, but like devise gem has its own initialization, and it's really complicated and long. There's a lot of different things we might want to like set settings for the devise gem, and we want that in its own separate file. It's saying, hey, if you want something different for different environments like development, test, and production, put them in the corresponding like folders config environments. So in environments, you'll notice we have a development file, a production file, and a test file, and we're basically configuring different settings for our apps in each of these scenarios. So like what it's just recommending is don't have one big file that like covers all three of these, so that when someone is searching for stuff, they can know, hey, I'm looking for like test related settings, let me go to the test.rb file and config environments. Let's see. Oh, it's also suggesting, hey, make sure you have a staging environment. Here we like don't really have a staging environment, but this is recommending, hey, keep a staging environment as well that looks a lot like production. I'm surprised it recommends that. Do you guys know why it might recommend that? Because a lot of times I try to make like my staging file like use the development.rb settings so that I know like that everything is working fine. Yep.
So I think like one good reason to have a staging versus like development environment is like if you're using a SaaS, like let's say you have an email service you sign up with, right? You might want to actually integrate with that service to make sure it works, whereas in development you may want to just stub out the service.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, like let's say you have file uploads, right? And you are pointing to like an S3 bucket. You have one separate one for staging, one separate one for production.
Mm-hmm.
And you might want that like every week the staging one just gets empty because you have to pay for all the storage that's sitting.
Right.
And you wouldn't want to do that in a development environment just because, you know, I don't know, I just wouldn't want to keep paying my production keys or anything like that.
That makes sense. Does everyone know the difference between staging and production? Right? Staging is basically when you like are testing an application, like you usually have a different Heroku website for it, and you like launch it into that website, and you can basically test different things, create random lessons in the example of RailsSchool, or like invite fake students and play around with it, and then it's kind of like a sandbox, whereas a production is when you launch the application into like live mode and real users are using it. So here you're just configuring the same way, like you want your tests to work off of this file, you want your, you know, when you're working on code, you don't want to be sending actual emails to different email addresses, you just want to know that like that method runs maybe. So that's an example of like when you would use these.
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if anyone has opinions on staging versus test. And if those guidelines are specifically saying have an additional staging on top of test. Certainly on top of development, I understand. But why staging as well as test? Which is what I think that
Test is where you're automated test, right?
that would have been my opinion as well. It's funny, Sunny and I actually had this exact same discussion a couple of weeks ago. What is the difference between test, staging, and production? It's kind of what we had.
Which is what? Can you explain? Elaborate?
Your answer, I thought, would be even more appropriate. Just what you just said about staging versus development, even more appropriate versus test, because you may or may not be studying something out in development, but you're definitely studying out in test. Yeah.
If you're testing your app over and over and over, you like definitely want to delete any crap you create immediately. You like, you know, don't want anything to persist. You may want different, like, I don't know, if I'm testing on my local machine, for example, I might have a different Facebook app that I'm working with that only works for local. So generally, if you create Facebook apps that you link to your website, you have to specify what URL they're related to. So if you're running a Facebook app on localhost, then you need to be like, this is my localhost Facebook app. And I'm gonna make another one for my like RailsSchool.org Facebook app. And I have another app for like staging.RailsSchool, like Heroku app or whatever, which is where I test stuff. So almost every like live like production website has a staging website. I think ours is staging. Let's see. I can just open it. Heroku open. I think ours is called Worker.
We don't have a staging environment.
Oh. What about our worker? Isn't our work? Oh, it doesn't run.
It runs, but it's just a background worker for production.
Oh, okay. Well, a lot of apps do. We should. Okay. So this now goes into routing, and generally, like it's saying don't include more routes than you need. So like, do you really need them all? Is a good thing for it to say. When you do like resources photos, it'll include a lot of routes. So for example, in our specific routes file for RailsSchool, we have resources polls. So if we do rake routes here, you'll notice that for schools, we have all the basic routes for schools: index, create, new, edit, show, update, destroy. And a lot of times we don't necessarily need all those routes to be accessible for an app. So what this style guide is saying is, do you really need everything? Be sure, like, don't create routes that you don't need, because it just makes your file harder to read. And here it's suggesting, like, you know, I'm not sure exactly, would this create more routes, guys? This bad approach versus this good approach? Is this only creating search versus creating all of? Oh, member do here?
What is memory collection do?
Yeah.
A member would be like post/3/bookmark. The bookmark, post number 3. That'll be a member route. A collection route would be, that's a pretty good example, photos search, which is, hey, I want to search all the photos for a priority butterfly.
So
it's like a class method versus an instance method. It's a really close way to.
And we can look at these here. So this is a member. When you're editing for a school on a specific ID, right? That would be a member, versus just like show all schools. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that they're the same. What you were asking, Eureka, whether those two examples were functionally different, I think they're functionally the same, but the reason that the second one's better is because it's like very clearly grouped.
Yeah,
right?
so everything associated with photos is in one section.
Somebody could accidentally come along and put a route between the two lines above it, but that's impossible to do below.
Got it. That makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, so what he's saying is someone could come in, hit enter right here, and write like something about the subscriptions route. And then it's not clear that the resources photos and photo search are like in a similar bucket, and it's less easy to read.
So it's more of a readability question.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't actually change the number of routes.
Right.
Well, another practical thing too is if you ever decide to change photos to say Polaroids or like videos or media, it's only changing one place.
Right. That's a really good point. So here we just change it here versus here and here. And then this is talking about member versus collection routes, which we just discussed. It says using nested routes is better to like explain the relationship. So we've done this like in like, I think the Hartle tutorial covers this too, which is like, this makes it really clear that like posts have comments. So in our example for RailsSchool, like we have, I guess we don't really have any nested routes. But basically, like, you know, you could have something like posts/1. So we're looking at the first post /comments. So that will have like all the comments associated with a specific post and have that for every single type of post. It's saying use namespace routes to group related actions. So like sometimes you want to have admins products versus like if you have an e-commerce site, you might want like all the products in your cart versus all the products in like the, you know, category of, I don't know, baby cribs. So this is something that I've seen a lot in like older apps that are like really hard to read, which do these matches and have all these like colons in there. And it's really hard when you read a line like this to know what's going on. So it really recommends like making it super clear by using things like resources. We talked about this, keeping controllers skinny. They should only retrieve data for the view layer and shouldn't contain any business logic. Each controller action should invoke only one method and then go like get the view. So like the best, like this, some of the controllers I showed you guys are much nicer. Like this is a really nice controller. Whereas others have like a lot more logic that could be pulled out potentially. Some people, so like when I was beginning to code, I would like create these like, I knew that if I made like this instance variable called venues, I could access it in my view, but I didn't know how to use helpers at the time. So I would create things like, SF venues, and like, you know, those are venues that blah, 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 or like, you know, whatever. Like I would make little instance variables that I could access in the view, which is a really bad way of doing it. Ideally, you want to keep the number of like instance variables very low in your controller and use your helpers to create different variables that you might need in your view. And then, so now we're talking about models. So we talked about how we want to like have all kinds of models. They don't have to be associated with our database. Naming models is like keeping them short and sweet. You definitely don't want abbreviations because it's really hard to like when I like look at some code and I notice someone type something that's like starts with a capital and like, you know, has all these little letters and then does something like find, I just know it's a model because that's how they're usually named. But if someone was like, I'd be like, what is that? I don't know, like having a quote in there or something. It would be much like harder for me to read. So let's see. So there's this whole like adder accessible thing in Rails that doesn't like, that when you first look at it, it's really confusing and you don't know why it's there. And when you generate things like controllers, it automatically appears. Adder accessibles just protect you from like setting a lot of stuff on your models, like without, actually they make it, Rails by default makes things not accessible so that you're not like setting 100 things. Like no hacker can come into your app and then like from afar set like names, emails, and contents of people or like get those. So we specify like, hey, we want this to be accessible and like the rest to be not. Does that make sense? So there's a Rails cast on this subject, but also like generally just know that this is for protection and you want to make things accessible that you want to be able to like save in your controller. Sometimes you'll get an error if you never like set these that, hey, you can't save name for a user because it's not accessible. It's not an accessible attribute. This is an interesting one. So like one time I was doing like making a form and I wanted people to be able to type in their email addresses. So here, this is like probably a bad way of like saying, hey, the email address format has to be something like this. This right here is a regex. It's basically saying like, oh, it has to start with any character and then have an @ symbol and then have any other character and then have a dot. Like, so it's basically saying, confirming that an email address has like a beginning, an @ sign, and a website.com. But Rails has a really cool way of doing it, which I think is covered later in this. Email.
Wasn't adder accessible the previous way of protecting yourself from assignment?
Yeah, I was wondering if RailsSchool.
You actually have to have a specific gem
To use it in RailsSchool?
in RailsSchool.
Oh, yeah. So the new way of doing it is like permitting parameters. So there's usually now, we aren't that fancy with RailsSchool. It seems like we haven't, maybe we have.
We have not. The answer is that it was a Rails 3 app.
Yeah.
the quick and dirty way to upgrade it was just to add this gem, and that's what we.
But like the way that let me see if I can find a new app that I have, or let's see. So I'm on the side at home building this website for my friend's wedding. And it's very simple. It's a wedding app, so it's very simple. And here I never have an adder accessible. But in the controller, I think I specify, I require and permit these parameters in a separate method, which I could have made private. So I'm permitting these different like attributes to be like edited. So I don't have adder accessible at all in Rails 4. So this is a really cool thing. So instead of doing something like this for email validation, which is like kind of like what's going on here if you first look at it, you can actually create like a validator that inherits from active model validation, like each validator, and like and it'll like have different kinds of validators that you can inherit. So I think, I can't find it right now. But like there's a Rails cast on this, email validation. So this is a Rails cast. Oh, it's old, I think.
Pretty much there's already one that's built in and used here.
Yes, or you actually like write the code in, but you inherit like from active. I think it's active. Where was it? Yeah, email validator. So this already has something like Rails already has something like this, but you can also like specify specific things. You like a lot of people use different kinds of like regexes to validate if it's email. Some are like really stringent, and others are like, oh, anything that has an @ symbol is fine. So a lot of these actually allow you to still put in your regex, but that way you're not like putting format with blah blah blah, and you're writing email true. And it's like much cleaner, like making this, when you read this, you're like, oh, it's making sure it's an email address. That makes sense. And then the validator automatically includes that. Like, so that's like a good way to do it. And you can put them in this app like validators folder. So literally it's like a folder just like controllers or helpers or mailers that has like any validators you might want to have. You might want to have one for phone numbers or emails, etc. Let's see. So this also goes into like specific syntax, like how you want to loop through things. You don't want to do like person.all.each. You want to do person.find each do person. So basically this like talks about how you're like, if you do the all method, you're being inefficient because you're like getting all of the objects at once and waiting for that. Whereas sometimes you want to like run through and find the first one, like the first person that has an email in the hierarchy, and then you want to stop getting all those things from the database. So that will basically go through each element in the database instead of get them all and then run the logic on it. Let's see. Oh, so I don't know if you guys have like seen in models, there's this concept of like lesson. You know, before saving, generate a slug. This is something that we do, like where if we create a lesson for like, in our case, Ruby Rails best practices, this itself is like a slug, and we generate that every time someone creates a new lesson. But we don't want them to necessarily be like having to write it all the time. So this is talking about how, where did it go? how you can have like ensure certain things happen before like destroy, or like, I don't know, like after save or before save, and how to use those. Oh yeah, so the schema up-down thing is super interesting. In the olden days, if you created migrations, oh, we have them all nice and up to par. But there used to be this concept of like def up and def down. So when you basically like, say you like create a user table, the up, like it would be like two methods, like blah, blah, and then def down. I'm not gonna save this because you never really change migrations in the past, but here it would be like create table, and then here it would be something like destroy table. But now we do this thing called def change because Active Record is really smart and like knows to like revert in the right order all the things we add and remove into our like database. So instead of this, it's saying do this, the new preferred way. Also, do you guys have any other questions of like folders or something that's like bothered you in as you look at Rails apps? Because this you guys could like also go through on your own and like look at. But like as you've run into Rails apps, has there been stuff that has confused you? Like, why would I put something here?
So I noticed that the guy who wrote this guide is actually the author of Google Cop.
Of what cup?
Google Cop. So have you heard of that? So
Google Cop.
Yeah. Which is a gem and set of executables that tries to automatically fix your code if it doesn't follow stuff. We can also have it like just tell you what's wrong rather than fix it directly. But I was going to ask if you've ever used it. If you, I think you can just run it on your app.
And it'll like point out all the things that you could improve.
Yeah, and it'll give you like a big like list of descriptions.
We tried on RailsSchool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had the time, if you had before, I obviously you know the answer.
Let me.
How many coding style errors? And it's very opinionated, so you will get a lot of errors. That just means that it doesn't. It just means that this guy doesn't agree with you.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely use this. Before that, I actually, in line with that, wanted to bring up Hound.
Yeah, bring up Hound. We have a personal connection.
What is Hound in?
Hound,
Oh no, but what app do we keep using that has? I want to show the comments. Oh, it is on RailsSchool.
Sometimes that'd be crazy.
So if you guys were to push to RailsSchool, you'd see it. I want to show you, like, I've made these pull requests and like Hound has totally yelled at me for my syntax. So like, I think maybe this one, anything that has lots of comments. So I literally pushed it. Not this. Did Hound yell at you?
Hey, Hound yelled at me once there.
Okay. So basically we literally pushed to like GitHub, whatever we wanted to push. And Hound is like, hey, that line is too long. And it's totally this bot that's like going through our code and looking at our diff and being like, hey, this is like, you're missing a space after this like curly brace or something like that. So Gabe had to go through and like fix all of these to appease Hound.
It could be that Hound is just running Google Cop in the back.
Maybe they're running out of code.
And Hound is free for open source. It's like $8 a month for a private repo. But I wanted to plug it a little bit. I'm not like amazed with it. I do like that it tells you when people add trailing white space. This is a hard one to keep under control.
Yeah.
I found. But our buddy Greg, who has taught about a dozen or so of our RailsSchool lessons, is basically wrote Hound, the service. So
let's use this. So I hope my terminal bundle installed properly. let's see if I,
Right.
uh-oh.
It's better than before, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna move this to my other terminal. Oops. Oh, it's going through the test, so it definitely works. I think. Sorry guys, I have too much open. I need to find where our thing is. Here we go. So this one. I know. Okay, here we go.
One of the best options to do that.
So I'm gonna close this for now because we're working. So I'm gonna do gem install Rubo, or I'm gonna add it to our gem file actually. Okay, so this will check our everything in the current repo. So that should do it.
Going down is actually a real version.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Control F maybe.
We go top dash rails.
Yeah, just like, I don't know. You do just that.
Okay, cool. I wonder how long it would take.
It doesn't take long.
Okay, cool. All right, so we're doing a little bundle install right now. Okay, let's do it.
What's that? A sense of humor.
I wonder what the C's and W's mean. Hmm?
W, I think that's
Whoa.
But I mean, it's exactly the same thing as now.
Oh my god.
That's so funny. It's offenses. Yeah, Hound has pointed out things. It has pointed out single quotes versus strings because it's, yeah, like if in one file I have like require, like for example in the gem file, I had like, here I just put a single quote. It has a problem with that because it's like, well, why are you using double quotes everywhere else but single quotes here? Like you need to be consistent.
But if you use all double quotes, does that happen?
I don't know.
Yeah,
If,
so the reason it does is, so there's two things that are going on. So the first one is that it says that you can only use double quote strings for strings that are being interpolated because it gives it like a name while using
Mhm.
It's just totally debatable.
That's fine. But the other thing is you can just turn off any of the RuboCops you want once you search on RuboCop files. So like they have all their called cops or whatever, you just turn them off and say false.
where are they?
You have to set up a configuration file. But
Oh,
just
cool. A rubocop.yml configuration file. And it has some default. So let's look at the default file and see what it's checking for.
I don't think it generates the.
Oh, I see. Okay.
If you run something.
But it is here.
Yeah.
Probably this.
Yeah.
So it's just saying all cops, use all cops except exclude these.
I exclude those folders. So it's excluding your vendor folder, which usually has your bundle stuff,
Mhm.
and your fixtures.
That's not the default. That's the what they're using for this.
There's probably a different default file, I think.
Maybe there's a command that installs it for us.
A command that installs it. Well, I'm sure the default is already there if it's already like checking a bunch of stuff, right?
But we can have it copy it over.
Oh, in the documentation, it mentions defaults. So it's saying what to include, it seems. Outdent, indent. So it's enforcing indent, perfect indentation, I guess. So it seems like, and the documentation, I'm sure, will say like what different things people usually set. Oh no, that was it. Okay, this is it. So maybe we don't want to enforce this specific style or something, and we can reset it. Cool. There's so much for us to fix. I really like that it points out long lines because that makes it like really unreadable for me if I'm on my like small computer instead of on a monitor, big monitor. Prefer single quoted strings. Oh wow, it'll tell you if you have a block argument that you never use.
Or argument with that.
I think this is a great way to learn. Like if you have any projects, like install this and see like what things to fix. You could even fix some of these for us for RailsSchool and do pull requests. But yeah, anything else that like is pertinent that you guys want to cover and learn about best practices of? Because if I'm not like the ultimate expert, we definitely have experts in the room.
On the subject of amazing tools like RuboCop, Google Rails Bullet. I was using this the other day. It's got a few like it's a little bit goofy in spots, but it basically goes through. You turn it on and then run your tests, and it can detect when you are not user loading. So
is this the same thing?
No, this is more trying to help you make sure that you're using your database effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if you have a bunch of users and they have profiles, and you're trying to spit out a list of users, and you're calling the profile method, but then you might be, without knowing it, loading the profile from the database for each user. So you end up making the number of you get the profiles and then making the number of queries of equivalent to the users plus one to get the users. So that's an n+1 query.
So does it tell you like, hey, that's an n+1
Yeah.
query? Okay.
Yeah, we can run that too. I don't know. We have a few minutes. I would totally run that.
Let's add it.
Add it to development and test. Like there should be if you scroll down, add it down there with our spec Rails so that we can use it. Just add gem bullet. And get rid of the group option.
Yeah.
And while you're bundling and installing, similar to RuboCop, there's like
I'd run it with Rails.
look for RSpec. Keep looking. It's in the read.
Nope.
No. Scroll down. We got for tests. Test.
Hey, do we have to write this first?
Nope, you don't need it. It'll run in development too, but since we have some nice tests.
Here we go.
Yeah, easy. That's it. That's all we do.
Okay, so we're gonna put this in our test. It says to put it in our environments
We
test
also have to
already.
do the bottom part. Okay, so it doesn't say RSpec, it's a spec, but yeah.
Okay. So in spec helper, we're gonna put this. So under spec helper. And then we'll just do a rake.
Yep.
So now it'll tell us how long our queries are taking based
It'll
on our
actually
tests.
fail all the tests that are guilty of this.
Uh-oh.
I think you use config without putting it in config block.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
like below the end.
Oh, I see. It should be
Oh,
in
yeah,
here.
that file's kinda, we should probably split that up into a couple files, otherwise this is gonna keep happening. So all these deprecation warnings, folks, are my fault. I upgraded the Rails. And
So are those tests not failing because of
Yeah.
the-
And usually it's like one of those things where if you know where you need to fix it, it's really easy. Like Bullet's not very friendly. It's like you just need to put this here, but it's hard to find out what it's talking about. I found. If you find yourself hitting your head against the wall after installing this a little bit, I share it.
I'm gonna paste it. Oh, did I already put bullet in here? Let's make this a little.
It tries to tell you, and sometimes it's easy, but other times it's like the stack trace ends very far from this one.
But here it's just a failed test. It's not telling us anything.
There's results.
Okay.
Right. Oh, and it also detects when you loaded too much stuff in your database. Like that's the case.
Unable to find matching line from backtrace. Unoptimized query error. Got it.
And sometimes it's just wrong.
Oh, I see. It's trying to help. It's like remove this.
Right, but it doesn't give you a line number.
No.
Yes.
It does help if it's like a very specific line in my, it points the error to a line.
Right, but that's not correct.
Oh, I see. Well, should we put this in the bad tool category? Should we put this in the bad tool category?
No, it's still worth it.
N+1 query detected.
So yeah, go ahead and open up badges 49, or maybe we'll be able to spot it.
Where is it? How'd you get badges 49? Is it for this one or another
At
one?
the top of that stack trace is badges 49 there, line 20.
Next to every 20.
Oh, sorry. It's in the right font.
Yeah, right there.
That's not-
So in our badges, let's see, 49 or 21. So we're getting user lessons attended, and we're going through all of their attendances and checking if they're confirmed and mapping those lesson IDs.
Yes, that might be a false positive because
Isn't attendances a lazy load? That association is lazy loading. So non-attendances would only give you.
it complains because it's not wrapped in the same transaction.
Okay, the attendance is misled.
It wants you to do like capital user includes attendances dot find 12, and then it'll make one transaction, get everything,
Oh, I see. It's saying that you're making 2 transactions by checking the attendances and then checking if they're
When you
confirmed.
open up the users controller, I think that there's one like sitting there we can just fix.
Okay.
Notify subscribers.
Okay, this guy. Should I look for it in here?
That's not an eager. It's one where remember that best practice where they said to use find each instead of each. We can use that there. For example, at line 29.
Gotta find each.
Yeah.
If you don't
Find
I see.
So that's not an n+1, but it's another one of these mistakes.
So the difference here is now that we're going, can you like say out the difference? Like
Yeah,
so.
so RailsSchool San Francisco, we have about 500 people on our mailing list. It's not a huge deal, but like if you think about the amount of data in memory to represent those 500 people in an array with all the columns and the tables, it's a fair amount of data in memory. And our little Heroku dynamo is just 500 megs, so we don't want to run out of memory. And it's mostly to do with memory, but it's really mostly to do with memory. So find each. I think the default batch size is 1,000, so it doesn't even help us with 500. If we had 500,000 users, we would totally run out of memory without the find each. With the find each, it's no problem because it basically just makes a query for every batch of 1,000 and instantiates only that number of objects. If these objects were huge, if like a user was like 10 megabytes and our 500 was killing it, I think you can pass like a batch size to find each and say, all right, we'll do it 10 users at a time. So
Cool.
some of these things like are less discouraging if you start them on new projects, so that you're checking every commit and that you find it sooner. Especially this bullet stuff where it's really tedious to track it down. It's a lot less tedious if you change 12 lines, then you know it's somewhere in those 12 lines.
Yeah, but for the style guide stuff, it's good to just read it ahead of time so that as you like build new projects, you know not to use certain things for a really good reason.
And I guess it's not always one or the other, right? Like I can imagine that sometimes you could optimize for database transactions and you could say, well, I'm just going to load everything in memory. I kind of know that it's never going to be more than 20 megabytes, right? So, but I know that those 20 megabytes are going to come from 20,000 vectors. And if I do .find each, it'll make 20 database calls as it loads 1,000 at a time. Because find each doesn't know what the size of each record, right? It's not that smart. So it's just going to say, oh, okay, you only want me to do them 1,000 records at a time. Because I vaguely remember having dealt with this once. Like,
we actually had to get rid of them?
I switched to find each, and my application became slow.
Oh.
And I realized that I should just add a little memory to my VPS and just do a find, and it was a cheaper solution on the whole. It was not that expensive to do that, but it was certainly expensive to do like 20 transactions. It's so long. So yeah, so I think you have to like think a little bit about which one you want to choose based on your use case. But it's good to have it point out. So that you have a chance to.
You also have the option of batch size 10,000, which is pretty cool because it's committed to your code. Anybody comes along, they're like, oh, all right, some weird thought, we can get away with about 10,000.
Do you set that in configuration?
No, it's something like you can just type it right now. Where is it? At the find each parens batch underscore size, whatever. You might be able to do it globally somewhere, but that's like something like that.
So you can pass it. Cool. Any other topics, like any other things in here? The temp folder or something? I did do a class on like just Rails app organization and what's generally where. But if there's more questions on that.
So like this, a simple one that we are doing in RailsSchool is sending your email in the background.
Oh, mailer?
I don't know if, we'll see if there's anything interesting in the mailer, but basically it's a best practice not to send your email during the request. Like if somebody has forgot password, while you're sending the email, your app server is unable to process requests for other users.
So we have a worker.
You know, for worker.
Actually, for email, we don't have a worker.
It's all magical. Check it out. Go to application. Go to the users controller again, where we just fixed that guy.
Oh, we have the delay.
Yeah, notification mailer dot delay says put on worker. It's very magical and wonderful.
So it's like, do whatever you were about to do, let this do its own thing, and finish whenever it does, but continue through the trace.
Is delay method provided by Sidekick or?
Yes.
Yeah, so we did a class in Sidekick, which I have notes up on that, which talks about how to use workers to like run processes in the background. And that gives you methods like delay that allow you to do things like not necessarily while having the user wait for that method to be done. Cool. I guess we can wrap up. So let's do feedback and class ideas for future. Anything pop into mind? Any of those? Any feedback, guys, on how today's class was or future classes you want?
I love that it covered so much. Like, there was a lot of like stuff in the later hour that I didn't.
Cool.
I'll echo that. I thought there was sort of like, we covered a lot of different things, some of which were more advanced, some of which were sort of easier, so probably something for everybody.
Were you guys able to understand some of the like advanced stuff we talked about? Like everyone was able to follow that? Not so much. It's like we need to work on getting all the levels, I think. Maybe like have homework to get everyone to the same level. But also ask questions. My feedback to students. Anything else? Any other topics you want to see covered? Anything you didn't really understand this time that you want to delve deeper into?
I was thinking, first I was thinking, like, we did have a class where we pick up an old project and we critique it for best practices. Anything else? So that we have to ask them questions or we look at it and say, how do we do that? Might be kind of hard, but I was wondering, like, one thing we could do is like have a class on just a feature, adding a feature to an app. And we just spend it, like, we can do a little bit of homework beforehand to like take features that we know can be coded in 2 hours, and then we just code it.
That sounds good. More coding. This is like more talking class.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have done this already, but like having a feature and then all the steps that go into breaking down that feature into smaller pieces.
Yeah, it'd be cool if it's a feature that right where people can be like, no, I think we should do it this way. No, don't add that column. That's a bad idea. You know, like, where there's actually a design problem. rather than just code, right?
You could have like a night where we just make like 3 or 4 different badges.
Any other topic, like Ondine, as you like go through certain interviews or anything, something come up?
Just today I was looking at Git backlog and I was trying to figure out how, I know that has something to do with what we're talking about, but Git similar, especially around notifications.
Around?
Notifications of changes in repos and branches.
Oh, okay.
And indexing, unmoving, spinning, reading.
Cool. Anything else, guys?
I think testing is the one that.
Multidimensional links.
Oh, right, that's good for, multi-dimensional arrays are useful for things like tic-tac-toe or Minesweeper games.
Something I was once asked, was, do you know any like different like learning patterns? I don't know what they mean on that, and I should do more research into it, but, like, I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but.
There's a book called The Redesign Patterns by Russ Williams. That's really good.
Yeah, so if you had a class on that as an introduction, I think that would be really helpful for you.
Cool. Any other feedback? All right, cool. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
I'll update the notes a little bit to like have some more stuff we talked about. They're all in the Etherpads for the various.
So you just have to log in and go back to the
Yep.
classes.
Yep.